Eleanor Grayson stood at the edge of the alley, the wind slicing through her thin shawl like 1,000 tiny knives. Winter in Ashwood was merciless, the kind that sank into your bones and stayed there, whispering of despair. At 72, Eleanor had known cold before, but this was different. This was betrayal, sharp and deliberate, cutting deeper than the frost. Her children, Margaret, Thomas, and Clara, had left her here, in this forgotten corner of town, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a single, crumpled dollar bill. No coat, no explanation, no goodbye. Just the fading taillights of Thomas's car as it vanished into the snow. She clutched the shawl tighter, her gnarled fingers trembling. The alley smelled of damp wood and decay, the kind of place where hope came to die. A street lamp flickered above, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked pavement. Eleanor's breath clouded in front of her, each exhale a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting. She could have wept, could have cursed their names, but tears and rage wouldn't keep her warm. Instead, she straightened her spine, her eyes narrowing against the wind. She'd survived worse wars. Loss. Hunger. She'd survived this too. Her children hadn't always been this way. Once, they'd clung to her skirts, their laughter filling the small house on Maple Street. Eleanor had poured everything into them, her youth, her savings, her heart. She'd worked double shifts at the textile factory, her hands calloused from the looms, to pay for Margaret's piano lessons, Thomas's college, Clara's dance recitals. When her husband, George, died 10 years ago, she'd leaned on them, expecting the love she'd given to be returned. But time had hardened their hearts. They'd grown distant, their visits rare and strained, their eyes always darting to her modest savings. The house, the little she had left. It was Clara who'd suggested the family meeting last week. Eleanor had cooked their favorite meal, roast chicken and mashed potatoes, hoping to mend a growing rift. They'd sat around her table, their faces unreadable. And then Thomas had spoken. "Mother, it's time you moved somewhere. Simpler. The house is too much for you." Margaret had nodded, her lips tight, while Clara avoided her gaze. They'd convinced her to sign papers, claiming it was for her own good, a smaller place, a care facility. They'd promised to visit. They'd lied. Instead, they'd driven her here, to this alley, claiming they'd be back after sorting things out. They'd taken her keys, her purse, her dignity. Eleanor had stood there, stunned, as the car pulled away, the snow swallowing their tire tracks. She'd realized, with a sickening clarity, that they'd sold the house, drained her accounts, and left her to fend for herself. The dollar bill in her pocket was their final insult, a mockery of the life she'd built for them. Now, as the snow thickened, Eleanor forced herself to move. Her legs ached, her joints protesting, but she couldn't stay still. She shuffled toward the end of the alley, where the lights of Ashwood's main street glowed faintly. The town was small, its heart a cluster of shops and diners that closed early in winter. She knew no one would be out this late, not in this storm. But she had to try. She had to find shelter, a plan, something to hold on to. The first place she reached was Rosie's Diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. She pushed the door, half expecting it to be locked. But it swung open, the bell jingling. Warmth hit her like a wave, along with the smell of coffee and fried onions. The diner was nearly empty, save for a lone waitress wiping down the counter. The woman looked up, her eyes widening at the sight of Eleanor, disheveled, shivering, her lips tinged blue. "Lord, you look half frozen," the waitress said, rushing over. She was young, maybe 30, with kind brown eyes and a name tag that read Lila. "Come in. Sit down. Let me get you something hot." Eleanor hesitated, her pride warring with her need. I don't have much, she said, her voice hoarse, holding out the crumpled dollar. Lila waved it away. Don't worry about that. Sit. I'll get you some coffee and soup. On the house. Eleanor sank into a booth, her body trembling as the warmth seeped into her. Lila returned with a steaming mug and a bowl of vegetable soup, the kind that smelled like home. As Eleanor sipped the coffee, her hands wrapped around the mug, she felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't expected: hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was there. Lila sat across from her, her expression soft but curious. You want to tell me what happened? Lila asked gently. Eleanor's throat tightened. The words felt heavy, shameful, but she forced them out. My children, they took everything. Left me in an alley with nothing but this. She gestured to her shawl, her voice breaking. They said they'd be back. But they won't. I know they won't. Lila's face hardened, a flicker of anger in her eyes. That's not right. Not right at all. She paused, then leaned forward. You got a place to stay tonight. Eleanor shook her head. Not anymore. Lila chewed her lip, thinking. My shift ends in an hour. I've got a spare room at my place. It's not much, but it's warm. You can stay there tonight. Figure things out tomorrow. Eleanor stared at her, stunned. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Lila shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. Because I'd want someone to do the same for my grandma. Besides, nobody should be out in this cold. For the first time that night, Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, not from pain, but from gratitude. She nodded, unable to speak, and Lila patted her hand before returning to the counter. As Eleanor ate the soup, its warmth spreading through her, she felt a spark ignite within her. Her children thought they'd broken her, left her to fade away. But they were wrong. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. By the time Lila's shift ended, Eleanor had made a decision. She wouldn't let this be the end of her story. She'd lost her coat, her home, her money, but not her will. She'd find a way to rebuild, to make them regret what they'd done. As she followed Lila out into the snowy night, her steps were steadier, her heart resolute. Winter might have stripped her bare, but spring was coming. And by spring, she'd make sure her children had nothing left to take. Lila's apartment was small but cozy, a one-bedroom haven above a shuttered bookstore on Ashwood's Main Street. The walls were lined with mismatched furniture and colorful quilts, each stitch telling a story of care. Eleanor sat on the couch, a borrowed blanket draped over her shoulders, as Lila brewed tea in the tiny kitchen. The warmth of the apartment seeped into Eleanor's bones, easing the ache from the cold. But her mind churned with questions. What now? Where could she go? How could she claw her way back from nothing? Lila handed her a mug of chamomile tea, its steam curling like a promise. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. You don't have to tell me everything, but if you want to talk, I'm here. Eleanor sipped the tea, its sweetness grounding her. She told Lila more, not just about the alley, but about the years of sacrifice, the love she'd poured into her children, the slow erosion of their bond. She spoke of the house on Maple Street, filled with memories of George's laughter and the children's bedtime stories. She admitted how foolish she'd been to trust them, to sign those papers without reading the fine print. I thought they wanted to protect me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But they just wanted what I had. Lila listened, her face a mix of empathy and outrage. When Eleanor finished, Lila leaned forward, her eyes fierce. They don't get to win. Eleanor, you're stronger than they think. We'll figure this out together. The word we caught Eleanor off guard. She hadn't had a "we" in years. Not since George. But Lila's kindness wasn't pity, it was partnership. A lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. I need to know what they've done. Legally. I mean, if they've sold the house, taken my savings, I need proof. Lila's eyes lit up. My cousin, Ben, works at the county clerk's office. He can pull records, deeds, transfers, anything public. If your kids did something shady, we'll find it. The next morning, Lila drove Eleanor to the county office. A squat brick building dusted with snow. Ben, a lanky man in his 20s with a quick smile, greeted them warmly. When Lila explained the situation, his smile faded, replaced by a determined frown. Give me a couple of hours, he said. I'll dig up everything I can on your property and accounts. While Ben worked, Lila took Eleanor to a thrift store to find a proper coat. The shop smelled of mothballs and old leather, its racks stuffed with forgotten treasures. Eleanor chose a sturdy wool coat, deep green, that felt like armor against the cold. As she slipped it on, she caught her reflection in a cracked mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken, she was weathered. Yes, but unbowed. For the first time in days, Eleanor felt a flicker of her old strength. Back at the county office, Ben had news. The house on Maple Street had been sold 2 weeks ago. The deed transferred to a real estate company owned by Thomas's brother-in-law. Eleanor's savings account, linked to her Social Security, had been drained via a power of attorney she didn't recall signing. The documents bore her signature, but it looked shaky, unfamiliar. Forgery, Ben said grimly. Or coercion. Either way, it's not airtight. You could fight this in court. Eleanor's heart pounded. Court meant money, time, resources she didn't have. But it also meant a chance to reclaim what was hers, to make her children face the consequences. How do I start? She asked. Ben handed her a card for a local lawyer, Anna Martinez, who took pro bono cases for seniors. She's tough, he said. If anyone can help, it's her. That afternoon, Eleanor met Anna, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. Anna listened to Eleanor's story, her pen flying across a legal pad. This is elder abuse. Plain and simple, she said. We can file for an injunction to freeze any remaining assets and start building a case for fraud. It won't be quick, but it's doable. Are you in? Eleanor hesitated. The weight of it all, lawyers, courts, confronting her own flesh and blood, felt overwhelming. But then she thought of the alley, the cold, the betrayal. She thought of the dollar bill in her pocket, their final taunt. I'm in, she said, her voice steady. Over the next few days, Eleanor settled into a routine with Lila. She helped at the diner, wiping tables and refilling coffee, earning a small wage and a sense of purpose. The work was hard on her joints, but it kept her mind sharp, her hands busy. The diner's regulars, a mix of truckers and locals, began to know her name, offering smiles and small talk that warmed her more than the coffee. She wasn't just surviving, she was rebuilding, piece by piece. At night, she and Lila pored over documents, piecing together the paper trail of her children's betrayal. Anna had uncovered more. The real estate company was a front, funneling money to offshore accounts linked to Margaret and Clara. Thomas had used his law degree to craft the documents, exploiting loopholes to make it look legal. The audacity of it burned in Eleanor's chest, but it also fueled her. They thought she was weak, a relic to be discarded. They'd underestimated her. By the end of the week, Anna filed the injunction, freezing the proceeds from the house sale. It was a small victory, but it felt like a tidal wave. Eleanor stood outside the courthouse, the green coat wrapped tightly around her, and felt the first stirrings of spring in her heart. The cold wasn't gone. Not yet. But she could feel it loosening its grip. She'd been left without a coat in winter. But she was learning to fight back. And soon, her children would learn what it meant to face her wrath. The days grew shorter, the snow heavier, but Eleanor's resolve burned brighter with each passing week. Lila's apartment became her sanctuary, a place where she could plan, dream, and fight. The diner, too, was a lifeline, its steady rhythm of clinking dishes and murmured conversations grounding her. But beneath the routine, a storm was brewing, a quiet, deliberate one, fueled by Eleanor's growing determination to reclaim her life. Ana Martinez worked tirelessly, her office a cluttered war room of legal briefs and coffee-stained notes. She'd uncovered more evidence, emails between Thomas and the real estate company, hinting at a plan to split the profits 3 ways. Margaret had been the mastermind, her messages cold and calculating, while Clara's role was smaller but no less damning. They'd assumed Eleanor would fade quietly, too frail to fight back. They hadn't counted on her finding allies. Lila, Ben, and Anna weren't just helping, they were her army, each bringing something vital to the fight. Lila offered warmth and a home. Ben dug through records with dogged persistence, and Anna wielded the law like a blade. But Eleanor wasn't a bystander in her own story. She spent hours at the public library, poring over legal books and financial records, teaching herself the language of her betrayal. Her hands shook as she took notes, but her mind was sharp, cutting through the legalese like a knife through cloth. One evening, as snow fell outside the diner, Lila slid into the booth across from Eleanor, her eyes bright with excitement. Ben found something big, she said, lowering her voice. Your kids didn't just sell the house, they took out a loan against it before the sale, using your name. The bank's sniffing around now, wondering why the payment stopped. Eleanor's heart raced. Can we use that? Oh, we can use it, Lila said, grinning. Anna's already drafting a motion to bring the bank into the lawsuit. If they're liable, it puts more pressure on your kids to settle. The thought of her children squirming under scrutiny sent a thrill through Eleanor. She'd spent years shielding them, sacrificing her own dreams to lift them up. Now, she'd let the truth expose them. But the thrill was tempered by pain. These were her children, the ones she'd rocked to sleep, the ones she'd bandaged and cheered for. How had it come to this? That night, alone in Lila's spare room, Eleanor pulled out a photo she'd kept in her shawl, a faded picture of her family, taken when the kids were young. George stood behind her, his arm around her waist, while Margaret, Thomas, and Clara grinned at the camera, their faces full of light. She traced their faces with her finger, her heart aching. What happened to you? She whispered. The silence offered no answers, but it hardened her resolve. She couldn't save them from themselves, but she could save herself. The next morning, Anna called with news. The court had granted a hearing in 2 weeks. It wasn't a trial yet, just a chance to argue for a full investigation into the fraud. Eleanor felt a mix of fear and fire. Facing her children in court would be like tearing open an old wound. But it was necessary. She needed to see their faces, to know if they felt any shame. To prepare, Anna coached her on what to expect. They'll try to paint you as confused, incompetent, she warned. Their lawyer will dig into your past, twist anything they can. Stay calm, tell the truth, and let me handle the rest. Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. She'd spent too long being quiet, letting her children's voices drown out her own. Not anymore. She practiced her story, recounting every detail of that night in the alley, every lie they'd told. Her voice grew stronger with each retelling. The words no longer a confession, but a weapon. Meanwhile, Lila rallied the town. Word of Eleanor's plight had spread, whispered over coffee cups and grocery aisles. The diner's regulars, many of them elderly themselves, began dropping off small donations, blankets, canned goods, even a few dollars. One woman, Mrs. Hargrove, brought a knitted scarf, her eyes misty. "My son tried something similar," she said. "You fight, Eleanor. You fight for all of us." The support overwhelmed her, but it also fueled her. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every parent betrayed, every elder discarded. She began writing letters to local papers, her words raw and unflinching, exposing the epidemic of elder abuse. The Ashwood Gazette published one, and soon, strangers approached her in the diner, offering handshakes and stories of their own. Eleanor realized she wasn't alone, and that realization was a kind of warmth no coat could provide. As the hearing approached, Eleanor felt the weight of what was coming. She'd have to face Margaret, Thomas, and Clara, look into their eyes, and demand justice. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also steeled her. She'd been left in the cold, stripped of everything but her will. Now, that will was her shield, her sword, her path forward. Spring was still months away, but Eleanor could feel it stirring, a promise of renewal. And when it came, she'd make sure her children paid for their winter. The courthouse was a gray monolith, its stone walls cold and unyielding under the winter sky. Eleanor stepped inside, her green coat a defiant splash of color against the drab interior. Lila walked beside her, a steady presence, while Anna led the way, her briefcase stuffed with evidence. The hearing was today, and Eleanor's heart thudded with a mix of dread and determination. She'd spent weeks preparing, but nothing could brace her for the moment she'd see her children again, not as her babies, but as her adversaries. The courtroom was small, its wooden benches worn smooth by years of disputes. Eleanor sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Anna stood at the podium, her voice crisp as she outlined the case: fraud, elder abuse, forgery. Across the room, Margaret, Thomas, and Clara sat with their lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit who radiated confidence. Eleanor's eyes locked on her children. Margaret's face was a mask of indifference. Thomas's jaw was set, and Clara wouldn't meet her gaze. They looked like strangers, not the family she'd raised. When Anna called Eleanor to the stand, her legs trembled, but she forced them to move. She swore the oath, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Anna's questions were gentle but precise, guiding Eleanor through the story of that night in the alley, the lies about the care facility, the stolen house and savings. Eleanor spoke clearly, her words carrying the weight of truth. She didn't look at her children, she couldn't. Not yet. The opposing lawyer, Mr. Carver, stood for cross-examination, his smile sharp. "Mrs. Grayson," he began, his tone patronizing, "you've had some memory issues in recent years, haven't you? Isn't it possible you misunderstood your children's intentions?" Eleanor's blood boiled, but she kept her voice calm. "My memory's just fine, Mr. Carver. I remember every word they said, every promise they broke. I remember standing in that alley with nothing but $1 while they drove away." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Carver faltered, then pressed on, questioning her competence, her finances, even her relationship with George. Eleanor answered each question with quiet dignity, her voice never wavering. She told of the forged signatures, the drained accounts, the house she'd loved. When Carver suggested she'd been difficult to care for, Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes blazing. Difficult. I gave them everything. They took it and left me to freeze. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, called a recess. Eleanor stepped down, her hands shaking but her heart steady. Lila squeezed her arm, whispering, "You were incredible." Anna nodded, her face grim but hopeful. "We've got them rattled. Keep it up." During the break, Eleanor caught Clara's eye. For a moment, her youngest daughter looked stricken, her face pale. But then Margaret whispered something, and Clara turned away, her expression hardening. The sight cut Eleanor deep, but it also clarified something. Her children had chosen their path. She couldn't change that, but she could choose hers. When the hearing resumed, Anna presented the evidence: emails, bank records, the forged power of attorney. Ben's research had paid off, revealing a web of transactions that tied the real estate company to offshore accounts. The bank, now involved, confirmed the unauthorized loan in Eleanor's name. Carver objected, his voice rising, but the judge silenced him with a look. "This court takes elder abuse seriously," she said. "I'm granting the injunction and scheduling a full trial for next month." Eleanor exhaled, relief washing over her. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step. As she left the courtroom, she felt lighter, as if the weight of betrayal had shifted. Just a little. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the sky was clear, a rare glimpse of winter sun. Lila linked arms with her, grinning. "You showed them, Eleanor. You showed them all." Back at the diner, the regulars cheered when they heard the news. Mrs. Hargrove hugged her, and even Rosie, the diner's gruff owner, slipped her an extra slice of pie. Eleanor felt the warmth of their support, a community she hadn't known she had. But the fight wasn't over. Anna warned that the trial would be tougher, with higher stakes. Her children would fight back, their resources vast compared to hers. Still, Eleanor wasn't afraid. She'd faced the cold once. She could face it again. That night, she wrote another letter to the Gazette, this time calling for others to share their stories of elder abuse. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, each one a testament to pain and resilience. Eleanor realized she was part of something bigger, a movement to protect those society too often ignored. As she sealed the last envelope, she thought of Springif green fields, new beginnings, and the promise of justice. Her children had left her with nothing, but they'd given her something too, a reason to fight, a fire that wouldn't die. Winter dragged on, but Eleanor's spirit refused to bow. The trial loomed, a storm cloud on the horizon, but she faced it with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Lila's apartment was now her home, filled with the small comforts of shared meals and late-night talks. The diner, too, had become her anchor, its bustle a reminder that life went on, even in the coldest months. But the heart of her fight was the courtroom, where she'd face her children one last time, not as their mother, but as their reckoning. Anna prepared her meticulously, drilling her on every detail of the case. The evidence was strong: the forged documents, the offshore accounts, the loan in Eleanor's name. But Anna warned that her children's lawyer, Carver, would play dirty. "He'll try to discredit you, make it personal," she said. "Stay focused. The truth is on your side." The trial began on a bitter February morning, the courthouse packed with spectators. Word of Eleanor's story had spread, drawing reporters, activists, and locals who'd read her letters in the Gazette. She felt their eyes on her as she took her seat, her green coat folded neatly in her lap. Lila sat beside her, Ben and Mrs. Hargrove in the row behind. Their presence was a shield, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Anna opened with a powerful statement, painting Eleanor as a devoted mother betrayed by greed. She presented the evidence methodically, each document a nail in the coffin of her children's defense. When Eleanor took the stand, she felt the weight of every gaze. But she spoke with a strength that surprised even herself. She recounted the alley, the lies, the loss. Her voice steady but laced with pain. "I gave them my life," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "They gave me $1 and left me to die." Carver's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her mental state, her finances, even her love for her children. "Didn't you push them away, Mrs. Grayson? Weren't you too stubborn to accept their help?" Eleanor's hands clenched, but she answered calmly, her words cutting through his accusations. "I didn't push them away. They pushed me out of my home, my life, my heart." The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. When Eleanor stepped down, Lila squeezed her hand, whispering, "You're unstoppable." Anna called witnesses next: Ben, who explained the paper trail, a bank official, who confirmed the fraudulent loan, and a handwriting expert, who testified that Eleanor's signature was forged. The evidence was damning, but Carver fought back, calling Margaret, Thomas, and Clara to the stand. Margaret spoke first, her voice cold and rehearsed. She claimed Eleanor was confused, unable to manage her affairs, and that they'd acted in her best interest. Thomas echoed her, his lawyerly tone polished but hollow. Clara was last, her voice trembling as she repeated the same lies. But her eyes flickered to Eleanor, guilt flashing across her face. Eleanor held her gaze, willing her to feel the weight of what they'd done. The turning point came when Anna presented a surprise witness, a former employee of the real estate company, who'd overheard Thomas discussing the offshore accounts. The man's testimony was a bombshell, exposing the depth of the scheme. Carver's objections grew frantic, but the judge overruled them. The tide was turning, and Eleanor could feel it. As the trial stretched into its second week, the pressure on her children mounted. Reporters hounded them outside the courthouse, and the town's opinion turned sharply against them. Eleanor's letters had sparked a movement, with advocacy groups rallying around her. She spoke at a community meeting, her voice carrying over a crowd of supporters. "This isn't just my fight," she said. "It's for every parent, every elder, who's been cast aside. We're not invisible. We're not done." The final day of the trial was electric. Anna's closing argument was a masterpiece, weaving Eleanor's story into a broader call for justice. Carver's response was weak, his confidence shaken. When the judge delivered her verdict, the courtroom held its breath. "The evidence is clear," she said. "The defendants committed fraud and elder abuse. The court orders the return of all assets to Eleanor Grayson, including the house and compensatory damages." A cheer erupted, but Eleanor sat still, tears streaming down her face. It was over. She'd won. Lila hugged her tightly, and Ben hooped, while Anna smiled, exhausted but triumphant. Outside, the crowd applauded, their voices a chorus of support. Eleanor felt the weight lift, the cold of that winter night fading into memory. She'd fought, and she'd won not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been left behind. The first signs of spring came to Ashwood in late March, a tentative warmth breaking through the frost. Eleanor stood on the porch of her reclaimed house on Maple Street, the green coat draped over her shoulders. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, but it was hers again, every brick and memory restored. The court had ordered her children to repay the stolen funds, and though they'd fought to the end, their accounts were frozen, their schemes unraveled. By springtime, they were left with nothing, not a penny, just as Eleanor had promised herself. The victory wasn't sweet. Not entirely. Eleanor had dreamed of this moment, but it came with a hollow ache. Margaret, Thomas, and Clara had faced no criminal charges. Anna said the evidence wasn't enough for that, but their reputations were in tatters. The town shunned them, their names synonymous with betrayal. Clara had sent a letter, a halting apology that Eleanor read once and tucked away. She wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Eleanor's life was blooming again, like the crocuses pushing through the thawing soil. She'd moved back into her house, with Lila's help, and turned it into a haven for others like her. She opened her doors to elderly neighbors, hosting weekly dinners where they shared stories and laughter. The Gazette continued publishing her letters, and she became a voice for elder advocacy, speaking at town halls and even a state conference. Her words carried weight, her story a beacon for those fighting their own battles. Lila remained her closest friend, a daughter in all but name. They worked together at the diner, where Rosie had promoted Eleanor to manager, trusting her steady hand. Ben visited often, bringing updates on new cases he was helping Anna with. The community had become Eleanor's family, their warmth filling the void her children had left. She'd lost so much, but she'd gained something too, a purpose, a legacy. One evening, as the sun set over Maple Street, Eleanor sat on her porch, a cup of tea in her hands. The air smelled of fresh earth, the promise of spring fully realized. She thought of that night in the alley, the cold that had nearly broken her. She'd been left without a coat, without a home, without hope. But she'd found her way back, not just to her house, but to herself. She pulled the green coat closer, its weight a reminder of her journey. Her children had tried to erase her, to reduce her to nothing. But she'd risen, stronger and fiercer than they could ever imagine. They'd taken her money, her security, but they couldn't take her spirit. And now, as the world turned green again, Eleanor knew she'd done more than survive. She'd thrived. She looked out at the street, where children played and neighbors waved, and felt a quiet peace. Winter was gone, and with it, the pain of betrayal. Spring had brought justice, community, and a new chapter. Eleanor Grayson was no longer the woman left in an alley. She was a force, a voice, a beacon. And as the stars began to twinkle above, she smiled, knowing she'd left her children with the only thing they deserved, nothing.